The thing about civilized space, and really the term civilized was doing some heavy lifting here, was that it operated on a remarkably simple principle: intimidation. Not the crude, punch-you-in-the-face kind that evolved species left behind, somewhere between discovering fire and inventing the wheel. No, this was refined intimidation, sophisticated intimidation, the kind that happened in climate-controlled conference rooms with proper lighting and beverages that wouldn't melt your internal organs. The galaxy had, over approximately 14,000 years of recorded history, developed what the academic types called the hierarchical dominance protocol. What everyone else called it was the pecking order. And if you didn't know where you stood in it, you were probably at the bottom. The protocol was everywhere. It determined trade agreements, territorial boundaries, who got to sit in the comfy chairs at diplomatic functions, and most importantly, who had to pretend to be impressed when someone else flexed their evolutionary superiority. Station Omega-7 hung in neutral space, like a particularly expensive ornament, all gleaming metal and unnecessarily complicated architecture. The architects had apparently decided that if you were going to build a station for the galaxy's most important diplomatic summits, it should look like several different geometric shapes had a disagreement and decided to settle it through aggressive fusion. It worked in a weird way. Nothing said, "We're all equals here," quite like a building that was equally confusing to everyone. Inside Conference Hall Sigma, because apparently everything in space needed a Greek letter attached to it, representatives from 47 different species had gathered for what the official documentation called the Quadrant Realignment Summit. What it actually was, as anyone with functioning sensory organs could tell, was a massive showing-off competition. Species from across 3 galactic arms had come to establish, re-establish, or desperately cling to their position in the great cosmic pecking order. The Vorthok Empire had, naturally, claimed the central position in the circular chamber. They were good at that, claiming things. They'd been claiming things for roughly 3,000 years, and they'd gotten quite practiced at it. The Vorthok themselves were impressive specimens, if you were into that sort of thing. 8 feet tall on average, covered in interlocking plates that looked like someone had designed armor and then decided to make it biological. 4 arms, each capable of ripping through standard hull plating. Eyes that could see in 17 different spectrums, which seemed excessive, but probably made for interesting art appreciation. Commander Vexithor stood at the Vorthok delegation, all 4 arms crossed in what was either deep thought or a very aggressive stance. With the Vorthok, it was usually both. He was addressing the assembly, and his translator device rendered his guttural language into smooth, only mildly threatening common tongue. We gathered today to discuss the redistribution of the Sagittarius trade corridor, Vexithor announced, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from representing a species that had conquered 47 star systems before lunch. But before we begin such delicate negotiations, it is tradition that we establish the hierarchy of this gathering. After all, one must know whether one is speaking to predators or prey. Subtle, real subtle. The Krillian delegate stood next, which was impressive considering Krillians didn't have legs in the traditional sense. They sort of undulated upward, their crystalline bodies catching the station's lighting and throwing rainbow patterns across the walls. Pretty, if you ignored the fact that they could vibrate at frequencies that liquefied organic matter. The Krillian Collective greets this assembly, their translator hummed. We who evolved in the triple star system of Krill Prime, where surface temperatures fluctuate between 400 and 900 degrees in your standard measurements. Where the very atmosphere contains sulfuric compounds that would dissolve most species present here within moments. We learned to not just survive, but thrive in conditions that would constitute an apocalyptic scenario for lesser beings. There it was. Day 1, hour 1, and they were already deep into evolutionary one-upmanship. This was going to be a long summit. The Nexarian representative went next, speaking through their hive-mind collective consciousness in a chorus of 17 voices. They described their homeworld, where thinking was a group activity and individuality was considered a quaint evolutionary dead end. They'd fought 3 interstellar wars simultaneously, while also composing a symphony, just to prove they could multitask. Species after species stood and presented their credentials. The Thoraxians, whose homeworld gravity was 6 times standard, making every single one of them capable of bench-pressing a small shuttle. The Void Dwellers, who'd evolved in the cold dark between stars and thought sunlight was a horrifying aberration. The Plex Collective, whose entire species existed in a state of quantum uncertainty and could theoretically be in multiple places at once, though they admitted the ability was mostly just annoying at parties. Each presentation was more elaborate than the last. Holo displays showed nightmare worlds of crushing gravity, toxic atmospheres, predators that made Apex seem like an understatement. The subtext was clear. This is what we survived. This is what made us. What made you? In the back of the chamber, in a seat that wasn't quite as nicely positioned as the others, funny how that worked, sat Marcus Webb, sole representative of Earth and the human species. He was a remarkably unremarkable-looking specimen, at least by the standards of a room full of crystalline beings and armored giants. Average height for a human, which meant short by most galactic standards. No natural armor, no extra limbs, no ability to see in 17 spectrums or exist in quantum superposition. He wore a simple gray suit that had seen better days and held a datapad that he was scrolling through with the kind of casual boredom usually reserved for waiting rooms and particularly dull lectures. To the casual observer, and there were several species present whose entire diplomatic strategy involved casual observation, Marcus looked exactly like what humanity was supposed to be. A species that had barely figured out faster-than-light travel. From a quiet little world in an unfashionable arm of the galaxy, desperately trying to sit at the adults' table. This was, as it turned out, a spectacular misreading of the situation. Marcus had been only half listening to the proceedings, mainly because he'd read the dossiers on every species present and could have predicted their intimidation pitches word for word. The Vorthok would talk about conquest. The Krillians would mention their death world. The Nexarians would do their creepy collective consciousness thing. It was all very predictable, like watching a play where everyone had forgotten they were supposed to be improvising. He was actually more focused on the message he'd received from home that morning. His daughter had apparently decided that the family cat, Mr. Whiskers, because his daughter was 6 and naming conventions were not her strong suit, needed a bath. The cat had disagreed, violently. The resulting chaos had involved 3 knocked-over bookcases, 2 broken lamps, and his wife seriously reconsidering their choice of pet. The message had ended with, "This is your fault for bringing home a feral murder beast," which Marcus thought was a bit harsh. Mr. Whiskers was a perfectly normal tabby cat, that he'd found hunting rats in the alley behind their building, and which had taken 3 days to trust them enough to stay indoors. Okay, maybe his wife had a point. Representative Webb. Marcus looked up from his datapad. Commander Vexithor was staring at him with what might have been all of his eyes. Marcus wasn't entirely sure how many eyes the Vorthak had, and at this point, he was too afraid to ask. "Yes," Marcus said pleasantly. "Your species has been notably silent during these proceedings," Vexithor said, his translator giving his words an edge that suggested this silence was being interpreted as either fear or ignorance. Possibly both. Perhaps humanity has nothing to contribute to a discussion of evolutionary superiority? This would be understandable. You are, after all, new to the galactic community. There was a ripple of what might have been laughter from several delegations. The Krillians made a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. The Thoraxians' deep rumbling could have been amusement or indigestion. It was genuinely hard to tell. Marcus set down his datapad and stood up. He was still shorter than most beings in the room, which was fine. Height was overrated anyway. He'd learned that lesson in high school, and it had served him well since. "You're right," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "We haven't contributed yet. That's because, honestly, I've been enjoying the show. You've all got great material, really top-notch intimidation credentials. The Krillians' thing about the triple star system, chef's kiss. The Nexarians' hive mind efficiency, genuinely unsettling in all the right ways." He walked down toward the center of the chamber, hands in his pockets, looking for all the world like someone taking a casual stroll rather than addressing an assembly of the galaxy's most powerful species. "But you asked what humanity brings to the table. So let me tell you about Earth." Vexthor settled back, all four arms still crossed. This should be amusing. What could this soft, unarmored creature possibly say that would? "Earth is what we call a Class 7 death world," Marcus began conversationally. "Now, I know. Several species here are from death worlds. It's very popular, apparently. Very in. But here's the thing about Earth. It doesn't just try to kill you in one or two interesting ways. It's got variety. It's creative. It takes pride in its work." He activated his own holo display, and an image of Earth appeared, slowly rotating. It looked, to most of the assembly, like a fairly standard water world. Pretty even. Blues and greens and whites, all very aesthetic. "Nice-looking planet," the Thoraxian delegate rumbled. "Oh, it is," Marcus agreed cheerfully. "Gorgeous, really. Absolute postcard material. That's part of what makes it so insidious. See, those white swirls? Those are hurricanes. Massive rotating storm systems with winds that can exceed 200 miles per hour. They pick up entire buildings and throw them around like toys. We get dozens of them every year. Those darker patches? Volcanoes. Mountains that occasionally explode and cover everything in molten rock. The really fun ones cause what we call extinction events. We've had 5 major ones. We're still here." The image zoomed in, showing various geographical features. "The ground itself randomly decides to shake," Marcus continued, and his tone suggested he was describing a mildly annoying neighbor rather than geological catastrophes. "We call them earthquakes, which is a pretty straightforward name, honestly. The tectonic plates, that's the planetary crust for anyone unfamiliar. They just grind against each other. Sometimes they stick, tension builds up, and then they suddenly slip. Entire cities can collapse. We just build them again. Usually in the same spot because humans are nothing if not optimistic about ignoring obvious warning signs." Several delegates were leaning forward now, their various appendages and sensory organs focused on Marcus. "Then there's the water," Marcus said, and something in his tone suggested this was where things got really interesting. 70% of our planet's surface is covered in it. It's essential for our survival. We die without it in about 3 days. But it's also constantly trying to drown us. Floods, tsunamis, that's when underwater earthquakes create waves that can be 100 feet tall and travel at 500 miles per hour. They just appear on the horizon and erase coastlines. We have whole early warning systems for them. It's a whole thing. The Krillian delegate made a crystalline sound that might have been skepticism. Surely your species evolved to avoid these hazards. Marcus laughed. It was a genuine, warm sound, which somehow made what he said next even more disturbing. Avoid them? We live right in the middle of them. We build our biggest cities on fault lines, on coastlines, in floodplains, right next to active volcanoes. There's a city called San Francisco. Sits right on top of one of the most active fault lines on the planet. Millions of people live there. We have another city, Tokyo, that gets regularly hit by earthquakes, and it's one of the largest cities in the world. We know these places are dangerous. We just don't care. He walked slowly around the chamber, and something about his casual demeanor was starting to make several delegates unconsciously straighten in their seats. But the environment is just the opening act, Marcus continued. Let's talk about the other life on Earth. See, we're not the only species that evolved on this death world. We share it with some really interesting neighbors. There are land predators that can run faster than most of your shuttle's in-atmosphere speeds. They've got claws, teeth, pack hunting strategies refined over millions of years. Ocean predators that are literally just swimming mouths full of serrated teeth. Some of them have been essentially unchanged for 400 million years because evolution looked at them and said, yeah, that's done. That's perfect murder machine right there. The holo displays showed various Earth predators, a great white shark, a saltwater crocodile, a polar bear. That last one? Marcus pointed at the polar bear. That's one of our apex predators, weighs about 500 pounds of muscle, fat, and bad attitude. Can smell prey from 20 miles away. Lives in some of the coldest parts of our planet where temperatures regularly hit -40 degrees. And here's the fun part. Humans encountered these things, and our first thought was, I bet I could fight that. Vexthor's translator made a sound that might have been a laugh or a challenge. And did your species fight them? Sometimes, Marcus said with a shrug. Sometimes we just made friends with the smaller predators. We took wolves, pack hunters, apex predators, perfectly designed killing machines, and we domesticated them, turned them into dogs. We keep them in our homes. Let them sleep in our beds. There are approximately 900 million dogs on Earth right now, living with humans. We did the same thing with the cats. Smaller, solitary predators with retractable claws and hunting instincts that put most species militaries to shame. We thought they were cute, so we just kept them as companions. He paused, scrolling through his datapad. Actually, funny story. My daughter tried to give our cat a bath this morning. The cat disagreed. The resulting fight destroyed half our living room. We still love the cat. We'll probably try to bathe it again next month because we're optimistic like that. The chamber had gone very quiet. But here's where it gets really interesting, Marcus said, and his voice dropped slightly, became more contemplative. None of that, the volcanoes, the hurricanes, the earthquakes, the predators, none of that was enough to stop us. We didn't just survive Earth, we conquered it. We went from living in caves to building structures that pierce the sky. We went from being prey to becoming the apex predator of the entire planet. We hunted the things that hunted us until they were endangered. And then we felt bad about it and started conservation programs. The image on the holo display changed, showing human cities, farms, infrastructure spreading across continents. We took a death world and turned it into a garden, Marcus continued. We looked at the environment that was constantly trying to kill us and said, no thanks, we'll reshape this to suit us instead. We diverted rivers, leveled mountains, created artificial islands. We changed the atmospheric composition through sheer industrial activity. Accidentally at first. But we're working on fixing that now. We didn't adapt to Earth. We made Earth adapt to us. Commander Vex Thor unfolded one of his forearms and gestured dismissively, though the gesture seemed slightly less confident than before. Survival and adaptation are not unique to your species. Many of us have conquered our homeworlds. Oh, absolutely, Marcus agreed readily. But here's the thing, we got bored. That got their attention. Bored? The Nexarian chorus asked in unified confusion. Bored? Marcus confirmed. See, once we conquered the Death World, once we eliminated most of the natural predators, once we created safe environments with climate control and disaster prediction systems, we got bored. We'd evolved in an environment that was constantly trying to kill us, and our brains were wired for that level of stress. So, you know what we did? The pause was deliberate, theatrical even. We invented new things to be afraid of. Marcus started ticking items off on his fingers. We created horror movies, fictional scenarios specifically designed to terrify us, which we watch for entertainment. We invented extreme sports, activities like jumping out of perfectly functional aircraft with just a fabric parachute, or climbing sheer rock faces hundreds of feet high with minimal safety equipment, or riding down mountains on planks of wood at high speeds. We do these things for fun, for recreation. The holo displays showed images of humans skydiving, rock climbing, surfing massive waves, base jumping off buildings. We invented roller coasters, Marcus continued, warming to his theme. Machines specifically designed to simulate the sensation of falling to your death, which we wait in line for hours to experience. We invented spicy food. We consume plant compounds that literally trigger our pain receptors because we think it tastes good. We have competitions to see who can eat the most painful food. People train for this. He turned back to face Commander Vex Thor directly. We got so good at surviving that we had to invent artificial challenges just to feel something. But you want to know the really interesting part? The thing that I think gets to the heart of what makes humans human? Marcus walked right up to the Vorthak delegation section. He was still shorter than Vex Thor, still unarmored, still technically in violation of several personal space protocols. He didn't seem to notice or care. We invented gods, Marcus said quietly, but his voice carried through the chamber's perfect acoustics. We looked at a universe that was chaotic and random and terrifying, and we created beings more powerful than ourselves to explain it all. We created deities that controlled the lightning, the seas, the harvest, death itself. We built entire civilizations around worshiping these gods, created elaborate mythologies, waged wars in their names. The chamber was absolutely silent now. Every translator, every sensory organ, every consciousness was focused on the human standing in the center of the room. And then, Marcus continued, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. We killed them. Vex Thor's translator made a sound of confusion. You killed your gods? Metaphorically speaking, Marcus clarified. We developed science, philosophy, logic. We explained the lightning, charted the seas, mastered agriculture. We went from worshipping the sun to understanding nuclear fusion. We looked at our gods, beings we had created to be more powerful than ourselves, to be worthy of fear and reverence. And we collectively shrugged and moved on. We didn't need them anymore. We'd become too powerful ourselves. He turned, addressing the entire assembly now. Every species here has talked about their evolutionary advantages. Your armor, your hive minds, your environmental adaptations, all impressive. All the result of your planets shaping you into what you needed to become. But humans? We're persistence predators. That's our evolutionary advantage. We're not the fastest, not the strongest, not the smartest in any one category. But we don't stop. Ever. Marcus walked back toward his seat, then paused and turned back. You want to know what intimidates humans? Really, genuinely scares us? It's not death worlds or apex predators or environmental catastrophes. We've lived with those forever. They're just Tuesday. What scares humans is stagnation, boredom, the idea that we might stop growing, stop adapting, stop pushing forward. That's our existential nightmare. Commander Vexthor stood at his full height, all four arms unfolding in what was definitely an aggressive posture now. He moved toward Marcus with the kind of deliberate menace that had cowed representatives from dozens of species. You speak of your species with great pride, Vexthor said, and his translator made his voice sound like grinding stone. But I see before me a small, unarmored creature with no natural weapons, from a species barely capable of interstellar travel. Your words are impressive, but words are not strength. He was now standing directly in front of Marcus, towering over him by nearly 3 feet. The threat was implicit and explicit at the same time. The Vorthak way. Marcus looked up at him, and something happened that made several delegates later claim they'd witnessed the moment they understood why humans were terrifying. Marcus didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't show any sign of the fear response that every other species exhibited when confronted by an angry Vorthak warrior. He just smiled. You know what's funny? Marcus said conversationally, as if he wasn't currently being loomed over by 8 feet of armored muscle. You're trying to trigger my fear response. That's what this whole thing is, right? Physical intimidation, show of force, established dominance. It's a good strategy. Works on most species. He took a step forward, closing the distance between them even further. But here's the thing about humans. Our fear response is weird. See, when we encounter a threat, our bodies dump adrenaline into our bloodstream. Increases heart rate, dilates blood vessels, sharpens focus. It's called the fight or flight response, and most species emphasize the flight part. Run away, live to see another day, very sensible. Another step forward. Vexthor, almost imperceptibly, shifted his weight backward. Humans emphasize the other part, Marcus continued. The fight part. When we're scared, genuinely terrified, we don't just run. Sometimes we attack. And the really interesting thing? The more scared we are, the more dangerous we become. Adrenaline doesn't just help us run faster. It lets us lift impossible weights, ignore injuries that would incapacitate us, fight with a desperation that logic would say is suicidal. We have documented cases of humans lifting vehicles to save loved ones, fighting off predators that should have killed them easily, surviving injuries through sheer refusal to die. He was close enough now that he had to crane his neck to maintain eye contact. We're not built for intimidation, Commander. We're built to ignore it. The silence in the chamber was profound. Vexthor, for the first time in his long diplomatic career, found himself unsure of how to proceed. He had threatened this small creature, had used every technique of physical intimidation that had worked on countless species. And the human had not only stood his ground, but had somehow turned the situation into a lecture on human physiology. It was, in a word, unsettling. Marcus stepped back, his posture relaxing, and returned to his casual, almost friendly demeanor. But this is all academic, really. We're here to negotiate trade agreements, not compare evolutionary advantages. Though, if we're going to get technical about it, humanity brings some interesting things to the table. We're excellent at logistics. Comes from having to coordinate activity on a planet that's actively hostile. We're innovative. Constant environmental pressure tends to encourage creative problem solving. And we're really, really good at forming alliances. He looked around the chamber. See, most species here evolved in environments where the primary threat was external. Predators, weather, environmental hazards. Humans. Our biggest threat was other humans. We spent most of our evolutionary history competing with other groups of humans for resources. We got really good at forming coalitions, at recognizing allies, at creating mutually beneficial arrangements. It's why we're so social, why we're so good at reading intent and motivation. We had to be, or we died. The holo display changed again, showing human cities, trade networks, alliance structures. In the 200 years since we achieved interstellar flight, we've established trade agreements with 17 species, defensive pacts with 8, and cultural exchange programs with 23. We're not here to intimidate anyone. We're here to do what humans do best. Find mutual ground, build something bigger than ourselves, and maybe make some friends along the way. He sat back down in his chair, picked up his datapad, and looked at Commander Vexithor with an expression of polite inquiry. So, shall we discuss the Sagittarius trade corridor? I've got some ideas about resource distribution that I think could benefit everyone involved. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then the Krillian delegate made a crystalline sound that their translator rendered as laughter. Actual laughter, not the aggressive kind from earlier. I believe, the Krillian said, that we may have underestimated the humans. Easy mistake to make, Marcus said generously. We look harmless. It's one of our better features, honestly. Puts people at ease right before we start negotiating really favorable trade terms. That broke the tension. Several delegations made sounds that approximated laughter. Even Commander Vexthor's translator picked up something that might have been grudging respect. The summit continued, but the dynamic had shifted. When Marcus spoke about Earth's proposals for the trade corridor, delegates listened. When he suggested modifications to the resource distribution plan, they were considered seriously. When he casually mentioned that humanity might be interested in establishing a joint research station in the contested sector, there were no immediate objections. By the time the session broke for what the schedule optimistically called a brief respite, but which everyone knew was a chance to frantically revise their negotiating strategies, Marcus had secured preliminary agreements on 3 major trade deals, established a framework for cultural exchange programs, and gotten an invitation to the Nexarian homeworld, which apparently almost never happened. He was standing by one of the observation windows, looking out at the stars, when Commander Vexthor approached. The Vorthak moved quietly for someone in articulated armor plating, which was either impressive or unsettling. Possibly both. You are not what I expected, Vexthor said, his translator making the admission sound only mildly grudging rather than completely reluctant. I get that a lot, Marcus replied. He was typing on his datapad, responding to the message from his wife about the cat situation. It's the suit, I think. Makes me look more diplomatic than I feel. You spoke of your species with great conviction, Vexthor continued. Of your death world, your conquered gods, your persistence. Yet you sit here in a gray suit, negotiating trade agreements like an accountant. I am an accountant, Marcus said, not looking up from his datapad. Well, I was. Before I got recruited for the diplomatic corps. Turns out the skills translate pretty well. Managing resources, finding mutually beneficial arrangements, explaining complex systems in simple terms. Plus, accountants are already used to dealing with people trying to intimidate us. Have you ever audited a major corporation? Those executives make you look like a kitten. Vexthor's translator made a sound that might have been offense or might have been amusement. With Vorthak translators, it was genuinely hard to tell. A kitten? Vexthor repeated. Small Earth predator, Marcus explained, finally looking up. Very cute. Has retractable claws and hunting instincts. We keep them in our homes as companions. I mentioned them earlier. My daughter tried to bathe ours this morning and it destroyed our living room. You live with a predator that attacks you, Vexthor said slowly. And you consider this normal? Sure, Marcus said with a shrug. Mr. Whiskers is family. He's also a semi-feral rescue that my wife explicitly told me not to bring home. But that's a whole other story. The point is, humans have a weird relationship with danger. We kind of seek it out. Makes us feel alive. He pocketed his datapad and looked directly at the Vorthak commander. You wanted to know what makes humans different? That's it, really. We're not stronger or smarter or better adapted than anyone else here. But we're too stubborn to quit, too curious to stay safe, and too optimistic to learn from our mistakes. We're the species that looked at space, literally the most hostile environment imaginable, and said, yeah, let's go there. We're the species that invented nuclear weapons capable of destroying our entire planet, and then managed not to use them for 80 years running. We're the species that knows climate change is slowly making our world uninhabitable, and we're still arguing about whether we should do something about it. That sounds chaotic, Vexthor observed. Oh, it absolutely is, Marcus agreed cheerfully. We're a mess. Complete disaster of a species, honestly. But here's the thing. We're a disaster that figured out FTL travel, established peaceful first contact with alien species, and is currently negotiating a major trade agreement that will benefit multiple star systems. We might be chaotic, but we're functional chaos. Vexthor was quiet for a moment, processing this. Your species is unusual. We prefer special, Marcus said. Sounds better on the recruitment posters. Look, Commander, I'm not trying to start a fight here. I'm really not. I'm just trying to make sure humanity gets a fair shake in these negotiations. We're new to the galactic community. We're still figuring things out. But we've got a lot to offer. And maybe, just maybe, the galaxy could use a species that's too stubborn to know when they're beaten. Is that a threat? Vexthor asked, but there was no real heat in the question. It's a promise, Marcus replied. Humans are here to stay. We're going to make mistakes, we're going to cause problems, we're probably going to accidentally start at least one diplomatic incident because someone didn't read the cultural sensitivity briefing. But we're also going to build things, create things, discover things. We're going to be friends, allies, trading partners. We're going to contribute to galactic civilization in ways no one expects because that's what humans do. We show up, we mess things up a little, and then we fix them in ways that leave everything weirdly better than before. He extended his hand, a human gesture that he'd learned most species found baffling but endearing. So, what do you say? Want to give the chaos monkeys from the death world a chance? Vexthor looked at the extended hand for a long moment. Then slowly, he reached out with one of his 4 hands and grasped Marcus's in what might have been the most awkward handshake in diplomatic history. The size difference alone made it look like a parent indulging a child's request. You are either very brave or very foolish, Vexthor said. ¿Por qué no los dos? Marcus replied with a grin. What? Sorry, that's Spanish. Old Earth language. Means, why not both? It's become kind of a human motto. We embrace our contradictions. The rest of the summit proceeded remarkably smoothly. Oh, there were still arguments, still complex negotiations, still moments where it seemed like the whole thing might collapse into the diplomatic equivalent of a bar fight. But there was also a new element in the discussions, a recognition that the humans, for all their apparent softness and lack of natural weapons, were not to be underestimated. By the end of the 3-day summit, humanity had secured favorable terms in the Sagittarius Trade Corridor, established preliminary frameworks for technological exchange with 4 different species, and somehow become the unexpected mediator in a territorial dispute between the Thoraxians and the Void Dwellers. Marcus accomplished this last feat by suggesting they just talk it out like adults, which was apparently a revolutionary approach to interstellar conflict resolution. As the various delegations prepared to depart, as ships powered up their FTL drives and diplomats said their carefully worded goodbyes, Marcus stood in the docking bay with his meager luggage and his datapad, waiting for the Earth transport that would take him home. Commander Vexthor found him there, because apparently Vorthak commanders had nothing better to do than seek out humans in docking bays. I have been thinking about your words, Vexthor said without preamble. About your death world, your persistence, your refusal to be intimidated. That's nice, Marcus said, checking his messages. His wife had sent an update. The cat was hiding under the bed and would probably forgive them by next week. His daughter had drawn a picture of Mr. Whiskers wearing a crown and the caption, "King of the House." Normal family stuff. I have a question, Vexthor continued. You spoke as though you were a warrior, a representative of your species' strength and determination, yet you claim to be an accountant. You are not military, not trained in combat, not even particularly physically imposing by your species' standards. Yep, Marcus confirmed, not looking up from his datapad. So how can you claim to speak for humanity's intimidating qualities when you yourself are not intimidating? Marcus looked up at that, and something in his expression made Vexthor take an involuntary step backward, though he would deny it later. Commander, Marcus said quietly, I'm a 42-year-old accountant from Cleveland who chose to bring his family's pet cat to a diplomatic summit because my daughter made me promise to show her picture to the alien friends. I have a mortgage, a minivan, and a lawn that I keep meaning to mow but never quite get around to. I am, by every human metric, completely average. Possibly below average if we're being honest about the lawn situation. He tucked his datapad under his arm. And that's exactly the point. You didn't face humanity's warriors today. You didn't negotiate with our apex specimens, our enhanced soldiers, our genius strategists. You negotiated with an accountant, an average, unremarkable human who was just doing his job. And I still secured trade agreements that will benefit Earth for the next 50 years, established humanity as a player in galactic politics, and apparently impressed you enough that you sought me out to ask questions. Marcus smiled, and it was not an entirely friendly expression. Now imagine what we could do if we actually tried. If we sent our warriors, our strategists, our people who are actually good at this stuff. That's what should really intimidate you, Commander. Not humanity's strength, our average. The transport ship's boarding announcement chimed through the docking bay. Marcus picked up his luggage, a single small case that suggested either admirable efficiency or a concerning lack of preparation, and headed toward the ramp. He paused at the entrance and looked back. Oh, and Commander, One more thing about humans you should probably know. Yes, we're really good at making friends. And once you're friends with a human, we're loyal to a fault. We'll fight for you, trade with you, die for you if necessary. But we're also really good at making enemies. And when humans decide someone is an enemy, we're persistent about it. We hold grudges, sometimes for generations. We've got entire academic disciplines dedicated to studying historical conflicts, just so we can remember them better. The boarding announcement chimed again, more insistently. "Just something to keep in mind," Marcus said cheerfully. "See you at the next summit, Commander. I'll bring pictures of the cat." And with that, he boarded the transport, leaving Commander Vexthor standing alone in the docking bay, trying to process the implications of a species whose average representatives were this unsettling. The transport lifted off smoothly, braking atmosphere and engaging its FTL drive with the efficiency that characterized all Earth vessels. Inside, Marcus found his seat, stowed his luggage, and pulled out his datapad to compose his mission report. Subject line: Summit results. Exceeded expectations at all. Secured 3 major trade agreements, established frameworks for technological and cultural exchange, and successfully positioned humanity as a credible player in galactic politics. Also may have accidentally started a meme among alien species about humans being persistence predators who keep apex predators as pets. The xenoanthropology department is going to have thoughts about that. Recommend we send more average diplomats to future summits. Turns out being relatable is more effective than being impressive. Who knew? Also, for future reference, do not mention gods unless absolutely necessary. Several species have very strong feelings about divine entities, and our whole "we invented them and then got over them" thing caused some interesting theological discussions. Status: mission successful. Would negotiate again. 1010. Would recommend humanity to other species. Personal note: the cat is fine. The living room is not. This seems like a metaphor for something, but I'm too tired to figure out what. He sent the report, leaned back in his seat, and closed his eyes. Outside the window, the stars streaked past in the characteristic blur of FTL travel, each one a sun with its own system, its own worlds, its own stories. Somewhere out there, on dozens of different worlds, in conference rooms and command centers and diplomatic corps buildings, representatives from 47 different species were filing their own reports about the summit. And in each of those reports, there was likely at least one mention of the humans. The strange, soft creatures from the death world who refused to be intimidated, who made friends with their planet's predators, who had conquered their gods and gotten bored with safety. On Station Omega-7, in the now empty conference hall Sigma, a maintenance drone swept through the room, collecting abandoned datapads and straightening chairs. It paused at the human delegation's seat, where someone had apparently left a small photograph. The drone's basic AI couldn't interpret the image. It showed a small Earth feline, wearing what appeared to be a paper crown, staring at the camera with the expression of profound indignation that only cats can truly achieve. The drone filed the image in Lost and Found category, items of unclear purpose, which was, when you thought about it, a pretty good description of humanity's place in the galaxy. Strange, seemingly harmless, occasionally destructive, but ultimately impossible to ignore. And definitely not to be underestimated. Because they came from a planet that intimidates gods, and somehow, improbably, they made it look easy. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses